When I was about 12 years old, back in 2007, my family took a trip to Kissimmee, Florida. It was even more fun because we were joined by some cousins and family friends. At the resort, my cousins and I loved spending time at the kids' club. For us, it was like our own little paradise. The club was packed with activities like board games, crafts, and group games that kept us entertained all day. The kids' club was run by a man named Dan. He was probably around 40 years old, tall and skinny, with a noticeable amount of hair missing on his head. At the time, I thought he was just a nice adult who organized fun activities. Looking back now, it's startling to realize how unaware I was of potential danger as a kid. If I met someone like Dan today, I'd probably stay far away, but back then, I trusted him without a second thought. We were told that Dan would be leaving the hotel in about a week, but no one explained why. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. On the last day of our stay, I lost my phone, a bright blue chocolate phone with a spinning wheel, if anyone remembers those. This was the second phone I'd lost that year, so my mom was pretty upset and warned me I'd be grounded if I didn't find it. Desperate to avoid punishment, I searched everywhere, including the kids' club. When I got there, the usual buzz of kids having fun was gone. The room was eerily quiet, and Dan was sitting alone on a couch. I walked up to him and asked if he'd seen my phone. He told me he had found it and put it in the lost and found, which he said was in the basement. Without thinking much about it, I followed him. We walked to the back of the hotel, an area that felt deserted. Eventually, we reached a staircase leading to the basement. The walls were bare concrete, and the space looked more like a storage area than a place for lost items. It was dimly lit and unsettling. Dan opened the door at the top of the stairs and gestured for me to go down. I was about to step forward when a sudden wave of unease washed over me. Something felt off. In a split second, I changed my mind. "Never mind," I said quickly. "I think I left it with my mom." Without waiting for his response, I turned and ran back to the hotel lobby. Still shaken, I went to the concierge desk to ask about the lost and found. The woman there smiled kindly and told me it was right at her desk. When I described my phone, she pulled it out from a box beneath the counter and handed it to me. Relieved, I asked her if there was another lost and found in the basement. She looked puzzled and told me the basement was under construction and completely off-limits. My heart sank. Suddenly, everything clicked. The uneasy feeling I'd had earlier made sense, and I realized just how close I might have been to something terrible. That night, I told my cousin, who was sharing a room with me, but she was only 8 years old and didn't fully understand. Even now, at 26, I often think back to that moment. It feels like one of the most important decisions I ever made, and I'm so grateful I trusted my instincts and got out of there before it was too late. In 1997, when I was about 7 years old, my parents got divorced. I was old enough to know that life was changing, but I didn't fully understand why. Despite their decision to part ways, my parents stayed on good terms, which made things a bit easier for me and my siblings. After the split, my mom moved us into my grandparents' old house. They had recently relocated to a new place but generously let us stay in their former home. It wasn't the house I had grown up in, but it gave us a safe place to live. We stayed there for about 5 years. It was me, my mom, my 2 older sisters, and our dog. The house had 3 floors, the basement, the main floor, and the upper floor, where my sisters and I slept. Although the house seemed normal at first, the basement quickly became a source of fear. It was by far the creepiest part of the house. Every time I had to go down there, even for something simple like getting something for my mom, my heart would pound with dread. The house had a spiral staircase that connected all 3 floors. A few times a week, we would hear slow, deliberate footsteps coming up from the basement. They would pause on the main floor and then continue up to the second floor, stopping either at my older sister's room, my room, or my other sister's room. We all heard it, and it terrified us. My mom avoided talking about it, as though pretending it didn't happen would make it stop. But my sisters and I often discussed it to reassure ourselves we weren't imagining things. Even our dog hated the basement and refused to go down there. Strange things happened frequently in that basement. The lights would switch off on their own, objects would move, and odd noises echoed when no one was there. One evening, my sisters and I were playing with walkie-talkies, trying to pick up the local police channel, which was a fun thing kids did back then. But what came through wasn't a normal broadcast, it was a voice, loud and clear, as if it were in the same room with us. It said unsettling things, but what frightened us most was when it addressed my oldest sister directly, using her name and threatening to harm her. We were so scared that we turned the walkie-talkie off immediately. Not even a minute later, our dog burst into our room, barking furiously at an empty corner. She was growling and acting like she was protecting us from something invisible. Our dog was usually calm and protective, but this behavior was unlike anything we'd seen before. She refused to leave our side that night. Another time, when my mom and I were the only ones home, I was playing in my room on the second floor. Suddenly, I heard loud, heavy footsteps coming from the basement. They were so loud that they sounded as if someone was stomping up the stairs. The footsteps climbed all the way to my floor and stopped outside my bedroom door. Then, out of nowhere, my door slammed shut with a force so strong that I screamed in terror. My mom heard the noise and rushed upstairs, but when she tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. It was as if it was locked from the inside, even though the door didn't have a lock. My mom called out to me, telling me to stay calm, and ran to get tools to force the door open. But before she could return, the door suddenly opened on its own. Another unsettling experience happened during a stormy night when I was home without my sisters or the dog. Normally, I wasn't afraid of thunder, but that night, I was unusually terrified. At the same time, strange crashing sounds started coming from the basement. The next morning, we found broken glass and objects scattered everywhere, just as we had heard. These are just a few of the bizarre and frightening incidents that happened in that house. The events always seemed worse when our dog wasn't there, almost as if whatever was causing them knew we felt more vulnerable. We lived in that house until 2002, and even though it's been years, the memories are still vivid. I often think about that time and wonder what it was about that house that made it feel so eerie, as though it held secrets we could never fully understand. I lived in a large house for about 10 years, and one of the biggest parts of the house was the basement. My dad had a strict rule: never go down there at night. Even during the day, he made sure someone was with me if I needed to go. The basement always felt unsettling, dark even with the lights on, and I noticed something odd. My dad, who was the bravest person I knew, always took our dog Max with him whenever he went down there. It was around 2012 when a friend came over for a sleepover, and he suggested we sneak down to the basement despite my dad's rule. We waited until everyone was asleep, my dad and my sisters, and then made our way downstairs. The basement had about 12 steps leading down, and when we reached the bottom, the floor felt cold and hard beneath our feet. We didn't turn on the lights, instead using flashlights so we wouldn't get caught if my dad got up and went to the kitchen. The basement was huge, with 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, a laundry room, and a big open area at the entrance. My dad had always told me not to go into 2 of the rooms, warning me they had glass in them. But that night, curiosity got the better of us. We decided to check them out. The first room was uneventful, just piles of boxes and storage items, which bored us quickly. But when we moved to the second room, things got weird. As soon as we entered, we heard strange noises. Thinking it might be my dad, we froze and waited for the sounds to stop. When they did, We left the room and wandered to the laundry area, which connected to the bathroom. In the bathroom, I noticed the mirror could be opened like a cabinet. Without thinking much of it, I closed it and moved on. Then my friend tugged on my shirt, saying he thought he heard someone coming down the stairs. Expecting to get in trouble, I called out, "Dad," but no one answered. Thinking he was trying to scare me, I brushed it off, until we heard more noises coming from the second room we had just left. I decided to investigate and went back into the room. This time, I noticed the door to the heater was open. I figured it must have been left that way, so I went to close it. My friend stayed near the doorway, saying he felt uneasy. After I closed the door and turned back, I saw my friend's face go pale. He was staring at something behind me, his hand trembling as he pointed. I turned around and saw a dark figure standing there. My heart dropped. Both of us screamed and bolted for the stairs. My friend ran ahead, and I was right behind him. As we climbed the stairs, we could hear the figure chasing us, its footsteps pounding behind us. When we reached the top, we slammed the door shut, waking my dad with the noise. We told him everything, trembling with fear. To my surprise, he said he had asked a friend to hide in the basement to test if I would break the rules. Relieved but still shaken, I let it go. But 5 years later, my dad confessed the truth, it wasn't his friend. He admitted that the house was haunted but had kept it from me back then, fearing I'd be too scared to live there if I knew. During grad school, I worked weekends for a junk removal company. My job involved clearing out old furniture, broken appliances, and anything else people wanted to get rid of. Most of our jobs were in suburban neighborhoods with families and young professionals, so I rarely felt uncomfortable or worried about my safety. But one afternoon, we got a job that felt like the setup to a horror movie. The house was down a long, secluded driveway. When we arrived, my coworker and I started filling out the paperwork for the estimate we'd leave with the client. While we were focused on the forms, we suddenly noticed the customer standing silently by the driver's side window, staring into the truck. Neither of us had seen him approach. He was about 6 feet tall with a solid build but had pale skin, gray hair, and a slight hunch. He wore glasses and kept his hands behind his back the entire time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Though he didn't act aggressive or overtly threatening, there was something about him that put me on edge. Maybe it was his blank, unblinking stare or the way he just stood there motionless. Whatever it was, he gave off an unsettling vibe. Entering his house only amplified the discomfort. The place was dimly lit, eerily quiet, and had an outdated, almost frozen-in-time appearance, as if nothing had changed since the 1970s. He mentioned offhandedly that he had inherited the house from his mother. The oddest part of the house, though, was the indoor pool in the center. It was completely empty, adding to the strangeness of the space. The item he wanted removed was tucked away in the farthest corner of his basement. Everything about the house felt heavy and foreboding. We explained how he could book an appointment if he wanted to move forward with the job, handed him the estimate, and quickly made our way back upstairs. The moment we were outside and back in the truck, I turned to my coworker and said, "I'm not coming back here if he books." He immediately agreed, which reassured me. I wasn't the only one who felt uneasy. We called our boss to let him know about the situation. Even though nothing outright dangerous had happened, the man's presence, the atmosphere of his house, and the silence had left both of us on edge. It was a gut feeling, like something wasn't right, and we didn't want anyone else to feel as uncomfortable as we had. Looking back, I think I should have trusted my instincts more that day. As we get older, we learn to recognize and respect those subtle signals that something might be wrong. That experience taught me to listen more carefully to my own sense of caution. On August 6th, I was in my mom's basement doing laundry while FaceTiming my boyfriend, who was out of town for work. I had propped my phone up on a bottle of laundry detergent so he could see me as I sorted clothes. While I was bent over, he suddenly told me to move aside. He quickly took a screenshot and waited until I was back upstairs to send it to me, not wanting to alarm me while I was still down there. When I looked at the picture, I froze. There was what looked like a face behind me. My boyfriend swore he hadn't edited the photo, and I believed him. He wouldn't have had the time or reason to fake it. The image unsettled me, but I tried to brush it off as a trick of the light or something explainable. A few days later, I was at my boyfriend's house. We were both feeling sick, and I ended up taking a nap there because I sleep better when I'm with him. When I woke up, though, I had this overwhelming feeling that someone, or something, was watching us. I mentioned it to him, but he shrugged it off. Later, he dropped me off at home before heading to work. That night, while lying in bed and chatting with my little sister, I happened to glance up at the ceiling. My heart sank. There was a cross above me, but from my angle, it appeared upside down. At first, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal, but the sight of it made my stomach churn. It felt like more than just a coincidence, it felt like a message, and not a good one. I immediately called my boyfriend and told him what I saw. He tried to reassure me, but I could tell he was concerned too. I decided there was no way I could sleep alone that night, so I went to my sister's room, hoping her presence would make me feel safer. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It lingered, heavy and suffocating, like something unseen was in the house with me. That night, I realized I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Whether it meant having my house blessed or finding some other way to confront this dark presence, I knew I had to act. For now, I wear my cross necklace every night, hoping it will protect me from whatever this is. Even though the fear is real, I've decided I won't let it control me.